Let me bring in my guest who is joining me virtually from Lagos. He's an investment banker and is Chief Executive Officer, Ametes and Ashla Advisory, Mr. Adeboyega Adebanjo. Good morning, Mr. Adebanjo.
It's glad. I'm happy to be back on with you again.
All right, it's always a pleasure having you. Let me get your reaction from with regards to this planned reintroduction of cybersecurity levy by the CBN. I'm sure you've been following and you see reaction from Nigerians there.
Yeah. First of all, Yusuf, let me put it this way. The act has been there since 2015, and the initial response of being against the act that happened in May this year or February this year was essentially because people felt inflation was high, cost of living had gone up, and government don't bring in any more levies or taxes. And I say that because as at 2015, there were no complaints about a cybersecurity levy. Now let's step back a bit and also ask ourselves about the legality of this. And that's a key thing that those with a lot of insight are asking. There's nothing wrong with the cybersecurity levy from the perspective that you want a focus on keeping not just the country safe as a whole, but the country's financial system. That's a very key thing. A lot of damage can be done if the entire country's financial system, it's getting to go online. If it's attacked, then the losses will be significant, not just to individuals, but to everyone. But the thing here is that, and I'd like to speak to someone who did say that banks are already deducting this. No, you already have VAT being deducted from your account. You've got the electronic money transfer levy being deducted from your accounts. So those are there. What happened earlier this year was that due to the cry about this, the Federal House of Representatives asked that the collection should be suspended as at that time. In my view, what the House of Reps should have done was to have passed a certain bill suspending it so it becomes law. The point is, the law says collect it, and if it's not being collected, then the government agency is acting against the law. That's one way to look at it. And I take nothing away from those persons who say this is not the right time to start the collection. Now, in order to make the collection more acceptable, the rate has been dropped to half of 1%, okay, on the value of the transaction. And I can see that the businesses this concerns are the GSM service providers, internet service providers, banks and other financial institutions, insurance companies, and the Nigerian Stock Exchange. The volumes here are significant, okay? So where does the other element of controversy lie about this? First one is that there's an act, it ought to be collected. The House of Reps said delay this, and they did not pass a bill to back that up. Had that been done, the CBN will require that bill to be repealed before they start. But right now, for as long as CBN is not collecting, they're not doing something legal. The second part of it is that the Constitution says that such funds go into the Federation account. And what we're hearing about the cybersecurity levy is that it's going to go into a cybersecurity fund, and it's going to be managed by the Office of the National Security Advisor. And that's where technocrats and professionals have problems. Okay, that shouldn't this be with the central bank? Shouldn't the central bank be looking at it? But in fairness, I think government is seeing the entire cybersecurity framework of the country, not just of the financial system. Okay, because when you look at the applicable businesses listed in the acts, you'll see that it includes GSM service providers and internet service providers. And those are outside the remit of the Central Bank of Nigeria. So it's important to come up with the proper laws to guide this.
All right.
The other thing about us as Nigerians, and I say us quite fairly, and what tends to worry people is that when you create such a fund, there are doubts as to its transparency and as to accountability. Of course, we're all aware that security votes, as it's called, do not have any limitations and do not require accountability in terms of how it's spent. People don't want this to follow that same pattern because it's genuine and legally earned revenue of organizations and persons that's going to be deducted and paid into a fund. I can assure you that given the businesses to which it's applicable, within a pretty short time, that fund is going to have a significant amount. Now, there's no plan, there's no setup, there's no national strategy for cybersecurity protection. And it is a key thing to have. There are threats where cybersecurity is concerned. It may seem like a digression, Yusuf, but we all know what happened in Lebanon earlier this week. And it's gone beyond pagers to walkie-talkies and radios.
Very quick break. When we return, we'll continue this discussion. Very interesting one. Glad to have you back. It's still Business Daily right here on Trust Television. Of course, we're still looking at issues with regards to cybersecurity levy that has been reintroduced by the Central Bank of Nigeria. Of course, before we went on that break, my guest, Mr. Adeboyega Adebanjo, was speaking with regards to what happened to that, the issues around that area there. And he did mention about issues on Lebanon before I cut you short there. Mr. Adebanjo, if you can continue along that thought of yours.
Okay, thank you, Yusuf. What I was just saying was to draw attention to an example of a cyber hacking attack. Once we all get online, there is a certain level of susceptibility, and it's important as a country to start looking at that. If your institutions can be hacked and attacked, especially the financial sector, it can have a significant negative impact on your currency and on your valuations. So that's the thought behind the cybersecurity fund. The concerns, however, is that it needs to be located with a government department or agency that is both accountable and transparent, so that people are certain that the deductions from their legally earned revenue is being utilized for their protection and for nothing else.
Indeed.
Thank you.
All right. Before you did make mention of the fact that when in May, when this cybersecurity levy was, the proposal was put forward by the CBN, there was an outcry, and of course the National Assembly did call for the suspension, which you alluded to in your opening remark there. And you also talked about the fact that the reason was because probably Nigeria were overburdened. The cost of living was so high, and of course that was why it was suspended there. Do you think the cost of living has improved now? Is the thinking of the CBN that the cost of living has improved now that they are now coming back to reintroduce this cybersecurity level, despite the fact that they've reduced it by more than half of 1%?
I cannot speak, and I will not even try to speak for the central bank and in terms of how it's thinking. But clearly, the supposition now is that we've had 2 months with a decline in the rates of increase in prices. There's some degree of stability that is starting to show. And these transactions are going, and will half of 1% be significant to an individual? That becomes important. Now, it is significant when you look at it from those persons who have perhaps not so much voluminous transactions to make. And that's why I feel that a flat rate of that amount, a flat percentage as such, may be a problem. It may be useful if it's going to come down to retail collection of the tax, to apply a certain amount and to scale it based on volumes, where the amounts are. the larger corporates who would make electronic transfers and all can afford to pay that. And when I say can afford to pay that, I'm not being unfair. I'm just looking at it from the perspective that corporates would tend to calculate their costs and add it to their prices where possible. But at the other end, individuals really should not be subjected to anything else that may diminish the balances in their accounts, if possible. Half of 1% can be a significant amount to someone who's got very little left in his or her account. Thanks.
Indeed, the CBN also did mention that accordingly, based on the circular that was released on Tuesday, he did directed all banks, other financial institutions, and payment service providers to indeed implement the new provisions as the act directed. Of course, like you rightly mentioned, according to the Cybersecurity Act 2024, pursuant to Section 44(2)(a) of the Act, which provided for this deduction, it's more like a law. So whatever the National Assembly did in May is not enforced unless there's a law or a bill backing it up. Is that what you mean?
What I mean. It's one thing to make a pronouncement, but really you cannot make a pronouncement to suspend a law. You need to pass a law to suspend a law that's existing, and then that holds.
Hello, are you with me?
Yes, I am here, okay. Yusuf, I can hear you.
Okay, so what sort of reaction do you expect now from the National Assembly? Probably, maybe they were not consulted before the circular was, passed to the concerned institutions.
Well, at best, the Assembly will call for an explanation, and I'm pretty certain they'll be giving a logical explanation. And perhaps that is the time, if such an explanation is made public, that we would be aware of the thoughts and rationale behind the CBN's intention to start collection at this time.
All right, let's talk this. Do you think this will in any way deepen the financial services sector? Do you think so?
Well, one of the provisions of the Act is that all these businesses, and again, Yusuf, let me read out the businesses concerned. You did mention banks and other financial institutions, but let's remember that insurance companies, the Nigerian Stock Exchange, internet service providers, and GSM service providers and all other telecom companies are involved. Now, one of the provisions of the Act is that all these organizations need to have chief information security officers. So the Act requires them to create a new role within that organization at a senior level. There must be someone well qualified to be in charge of information security or cybersecurity, as we may want to call it. So that changes everything within the financial sector. It starts to bring into focus the need to be much more aware and alert of the risks of electronic transactions and to be able to take plans to mitigate those risks if they were to occur.
So you do not think that the businesses operating in Nigeria are already overburdened with different kinds of tax? And of course, bringing up this one is another way of, pushing some businesses out of existence.
No doubt, Yusuf. There's always going to be a trade-off. And one of my concerns about this tax really is that those from whom the levy will be deducted, they're not so many. You look at these industries, you look at the play out in the industries, you realize that there is a chunk of Nigerians left out of this, the tax collection, as it were. So, of course, there would always be a burden. And the issue here is that at a point in time, the government actually created a committee, if you recall, to look at the various taxes and to come up with some degree of harmonization for these taxes. That committee is there. It's important that as the central bank itself and the House of Representatives, if they engage concerning the commencement of collection on this tax, important that they start talking to that committee because they have a role. It was put together by the presidency. And so there's something they need to be able to do in terms of contributing to the harmonization of all these taxes.
All right. Mr. Adebanjo, I'm more concerned about the financial inclusion effort of the federal government. Of course, a lot of Nigerians were actually, embracing it. Don't you think with this coming up with this kind of levies and so many others that they have to pay for their electronic transactions, don't you think it's more like an attack of financial inclusion? And of course, this will, affect the banking system. Many Nigerians will, decided to go on a cash-to-cash based transactions.
Well, we just might see a return of alternatives. I have no doubt that some people are going to start trying to work out what are the alternatives to avoid the tax, if possible. And this is why I do say, just so that people don't find themselves doing things against the tax laws. This is why I say that it's very important that, the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms starts to look at this, because part of its terms of reference is to review all the taxes and levies and to harmonize them into a single-digit list. So it's important that these organizations start to come together and start to make presentations through the business collectives we have. We've got the NESG that's going to come up. The banks themselves engage. Once they start to get the feedback, something must go back in terms of information upwards to start getting the government to consider this. But let's understand, like I said, on one hand, you've got cybersecurity threats that are happening around the world and that may affect us here in Nigeria. And on the other hand, you've got people saying, we shouldn't be paying additional tax to protect us from cybersecurity. The government needs to be able to take from the tax they're collecting already and to do so. So that's the thought there. And I cannot say the solution is right, because both sides can argue with reason. And so again, I make the reference to the committee. Someone must be an arbiter here.
Absolutely. My concern is, shouldn't government being able to handle this, considering the fact that in recent times, as far back as 2022, and early 2023, we saw what Nigeria went through with regards to currency redesigning and quite a whole lot of money scarcity that we had in the economy, and that has affected the Nigerian confidence in the financial sector. Now we are introducing again another tax that will even further affect their confidences in in the banking system. Don't you think, like I said earlier, is it not like an affront or an attack on the government plans to deepen the financial inclusion?
Well, you're absolutely right, Yusuf. I wouldn't call it an attack, but it would certainly affect the psyche of those that are involved in electronic transactions. It will attract financial inclusion, because the man in the village who wants to make a transfer, or in a suburb who wants to make a transfer, when he's told that his entire 1 naira would lose half a kobo, he will start to think about it. It may seem like a small amount, but he needs to be able to, someone needs to explain that in detail. Otherwise, what you'll find is he's going to put the money into a bag and he's going to go all the way and hand it over as cash. But I hope we don't see a return to cash. I hope somehow or the other there's a moderation that can come, because such moves as this ought to be subject to significant discussion, particularly because of the context of where we are right now.
All right, Mr. Adebanjo, let's look at the issue around the Monetary Policy Committee meeting now that is expected next week, Monday, Tuesday. The 297th Monetary Policy Committee meeting will start on Monday. And of course, a lot of issues are already at the front burner. Inflation declined consecutively for 2 months for July and August. And of course, the foreign reserves, according to the CBN, has recorded about $2.35 billion in 7 months from what Mr. Wale Edu, the Minister of Finance, spoke about that yesterday. And we also see the CBN at the same time, earlier in the week, did say that the subsidy removal and of course some other economic policies of this government is putting pressure on foreign reserve. What do you think should be top of the agenda of the MPC meeting as they start their meeting on Monday?
Well, recall we had a conversation a while back, and what I had said then was all the effects, all the moves being made by the central bank, the aim, of course, is stability. And over time, those decisions will start to have an effect on the economy. Is this the effect we're seeing? Perhaps we need to have another couple of months of looking at what direction we are. For that reason, I would not be surprised if the next MPC meeting concludes with rates being left stable as they are. If rates are increased, then cost of funding businesses will continue to increase. Remember that the recent increase in petrol price that was just last week. And then we're still unsure what the pump price of the local refinery, and I'm saying local refinery deliberately, the refinery within Nigeria, what the pump price of the petrol from there will be. The suggestion is it would even be slightly higher than the imported petrol that is being sold at $8.55 in NNPC stations in Lagos right now. That means that energy price impacts on inflation is yet to be felt. I would think that the CBN will be mindful of this. They may want to see the extent to which it impacts before they move. And from next week, Tuesday, it's still another 4 weeks to the next one. And that's still enough time to see what the impact is and decide. If inflation nudges up again in terms of the rate of increase, okay, what we have is that inflation itself is a measure. So it's the rate of increase of prices that has decreased. Not that prices are not rising. They are rising, but at a slower rate. Now, if by October, we have a situation where rates increase significantly and much faster in a shorter time. And remember, headline inflation is all about energy and food. And those are essentially household-related matters. Okay, you will have an instance where inflation will pop up again. So again, that speaks to why I expect the CBN's MPC to deal with stability. Now, interestingly enough, just about a month ago, the central bank actually conducted a survey. In my view, it wasn't wide enough. They surveyed just about 1,165 households around the country. And I have no sense of where within the income strata these households were. But 1,165 is too much of a small sample to be representative. Nevertheless, the results are interesting because you had about 67% of those households saying that they would want lower rates. Now, this is a CBN conducted survey, and if it's speaking to the CBN, the idea is that if you cannot even lower the rates, keep it stable, okay? Other than the 67, you had another 10% saying keep the rates as it were. So that's at least 77% that would be like keep it where it is. And that's over 3/4 of those surveyed wanting some stability. And truly, that's all we want. We all want stability, consistency, so we can plan ahead. Okay, only about 11% wanted something in terms of higher interest rates. Why? I don't know, but let's look at that. If interest rates were to increase right now, you would have costs of funding in businesses go up. It will push up prices. Two, it will work in terms of consistently, again, additionally reducing the money supply by pushing money away from circulation to a degree. It will push money to the bonds markets and all for people to invest and not hold cash so that they can get some results. But what we want is stability. I would expect that next week the MPC will keep rates stable.
Indeed, well, I'm sure Mr. Cardoso is listening to you, and he had said consistently that the CBN will maintain orthodox monetary policy, focusing on bringing down inflation there. So you expect them to maintain, to keep to their own mandate as the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Yeah, that's right. And what I just described is about, being orthodox. They've also put feelers out there so they can manage between the professional perspective of what they need to do with monetary policy and look at it from the perspective of how it would impact the populace. And I think it's pretty clear. So that's what to expect. I also hope that in that same breath, as the CBN continues to look at the exchange rates, they're able to maintain the exchange rates or even improve it from its current rates.
Exchange rate is another issue I'm sure the CBN will want to also do something about as we speak. Naira is over 1,600 and something.
600.
The market pound is above 2,000 naira. I think as at yesterday it was 2,200, and that is not really looking good for our local currency. That should be a very big agenda there for the CBN. But my question is this: there seems to be a kind of a crack, or more like a lack of collaboration between the monetary and, of course, the fiscal authority. In one breath, the CBN is saying that the policies of government is putting pressure on foreign reserve, and of course, in another breath, the Minister of Finance is coming out to say the reserve has accumulated about $2.35 billion in the last 7 months. Where do you think is this crack coming from?
Well, Yusuf, you're spot on, and for a lot of us watching what's going on in the economy, it brings about some concern, and we just wonder maybe there's something else we don't know. There's a need to harmonize. I haven't read in the news in a while if the National Economic Council has had a meeting, and I think it's important that such a meeting holds. And that there's some harmony in terms of direction for the economy. This is absolutely critical at this point. As you well know, there's so many things that are bound to happen in the third quarter of the year that would affect the exchange rate, that would affect interest rates, that would affect money supply. For those people who typically import and who can afford to import, they will be opening the LCs to do their importation latest by mid-November, so that they don't have to go to the ports in December around Christmas to clear out any goods. And so those need to be done. Those orders need to be put in place. And they'll be hoping, of course, that the exchange rate will remain the same by the time those goods come. Some of those shipments will probably be delivered in January for items that are not available on the shelf. So these are considerations that need to be borne in mind. We've heard so much about the floods. it will take a few weeks more before the floods reach the southern parts of the country or even the north central. And when that happens, it always impacts agriculture in a negative way. It pushes up prices. So here we are where energy costs may be pushing up prices because of increased transportation costs, and then a natural disaster also pushing up prices. And I'm hoping, even as I say, that the flood doesn't really devastate a lot more states the way we've seen it recently during the past. Now, these are the things that the NEC ought to sit down and think about and create a harmony between both fiscal and monetary policies where this is concerned.
All right. In 30 seconds, you have said you expect the MPC to keep the rate unchanged. What happened? I mean, to keep the rate unchanged, what happened if there's a decrease or an increase?
Well, like I said, if there's an increase, everybody will just keep tightening their belt, because in the times of increase, it was all a hue and cry about spending more money to borrow, so to say, increased interest rates. So that will reduce borrowings from banks. Right. And we all know that banks are cash rich right now. So what are they going to do with all that money? Probably invest it in government bonds wherever they can. If it decreases, that will be good news, at least for those who want to stock up, who want to import. And they will be able to stock up for next year, regardless of where the cycle of the business and the economy will take them. So it will happen either way. Will it be good? Will it be bad? I guess the scenario needs to play itself out.
Absolutely. We look forward to that meeting on Monday, 297 meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Mr. Adeboyega Adebanjo, investment banker, economist, and of course, CEO, Amites and Ashlar Advisory. I must thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a nice day in Lagos. With that is a wrap on the show today. Join us on Monday for a fresh edition. I am Yusuf Akogu.